Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Well, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm your host, Bob Weeks, and this week I have, these gentlemen really need no introduction to Wichita radio listeners. In the center, Joseph Ashby, really the dean of Wichita Talk Radio hosts, coming up on 4 years almost, isn't it, Joseph?
It's been 4. I feel old now that you call me the dean of something.
Okay, the dean there. Joseph is on KQAM radio from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Monday through Friday, and of course KQAM available on the internet, the TuneIn radio app, and other ways as well. And across the table, Andy Hooser, who's newer to Wichita, but he has the noon to 2 p.m. slot Monday through Friday, also on KQAM and other alternative ways. Both gentlemen have a podcast of their show, which you can find on their Facebook pages, meaning you can listen to the show at your leisure at any time. So, gentlemen, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
Great to be back.
And I should let the audience know we're recording this on Wednesday, the day after Super Tuesday. This will broadcast on the air Sunday, but we'll have it up on YouTube quite a bit earlier than that. So, Super Tuesday, that's what's got to be in the news today. Can anybody give us a quick rundown of, let's look at the Democrats first, because I think that's a simpler situation than the Republicans. Joseph, what about the Democrats?
I would say that the turning point in the Democrat nomination was Nevada, where Hillary Clinton won just by a hair. Mm-hmm. And by the time they got to South Carolina, which was last Saturday, she won by 50 points.
Yeah, big win.
And Bernie Sanders still came and won 4 states, but they were smaller states than the ones Clinton won, and she won so handily in most places that I don't think that there's really any doubt at this point that Bernie Sanders is done and Hillary Clinton's the winner.
But do you think that he'll continue on in the campaign? I mean, he's had a lot of success raising money. I don't know how much he has on hand right now, but do you think he'll continue on to the end?
He says he's going on, and usually you look at how would the party positioning themselves for a general election look at that. And I think having someone who makes Hillary Clinton look like the centrist one helps her in a general, so I don't really see a ton of pressure on him to get out.
And there's some conspiracies theorists that said that, Sanders was planted into the campaign to give Hillary a foil to, just like you said, make her look more in the center. But the danger is that Bernie has really struck a chord with a lot of people, I think. And if he continues on and gets a substantial number of delegates, let's say 1/3 or 40% of the delegates, what does that mean when the Democrats have their convention? Do you know?
If it means if he wants an administration job, he'll be able to get one.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine it being vice president just because his personality is just not super friendly to a general election electorate, and so they'll go with somebody a bit more mundane than him.
And sometimes they talk about you go into the convention with some delegates and you get some concessions on the party's platform, but do party platforms mean anything anymore?
Well, I don't really know what Bernie Sanders wants that Hillary Clinton doesn't want from a policy perspective, so
yeah.
I'm not sure.
Well, I don't think Hillary's come out for free college yet, or has she? I don't know, but
you're right. It's a little bit different. It's free versus, Hillary Clinton actually, for a number of weeks there when it looked like she was in trouble, made all of the arguments that a conservative Republican would make. You can't just give everybody free stuff, or that's way too expensive. And I remember sitting back thinking, this is the most glorious thing I've ever seen, because suddenly the liberal Democrat is the responsible one because the socialist is the one who's trying to pull her to the left.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Andy, what about the Republicans? I noticed today on your show you had Jim Bohannon. Is his first name Jim or Jimbo? I've never been able to figure that out.
His nickname's Jimbo, but yeah, Jim Bohannon.
Okay, all right. Last name Bohannon. And he's, I think, summed up the race pretty succinctly. Do you remember what he said, or in your own words, what about the Republicans?
Well, for the Republican side, I mean, it was pretty much laid out. There was no real big surprises. Ted Cruz won his home state of Texas, and by a decent margin. Donald Trump took 7 of the 11 states. Marco Rubio surprised us with 1 state, with Minnesota.
And that was a caucus, I think, too.
And that was a caucus, yeah. So, I mean, there were no big surprises. But, I mean, it's really narrowed down to 2 candidates. So we need to seriously look at which one's going to start dropping out, which one's going to try and consolidate. There's been talks of Trump and Cruz needing to consolidate to fight Rubio. I think more the side of needing to consolidate between Cruz and Rubio to fight Trump, because he's definitely got the momentum right now. He's got just less than 100 delegates over Cruz right now. So we need to look at what we're doing, but really no surprises from last night.
Because I think Cruz has about twice as many delegates as Rubio does, quite a bit of lead there. I would mention that Cruz won Iowa caucuses. I had to message my friend in Alaska late last night and say, haven't you guys closed your polls yet? And he says, well, it takes a while to get the snowshoes off and everything. Because he actually lives, there is a town called North Pole, Alaska, and that's where he lives. But anyway, so Joseph, you had a thought there, I think.
Oh, I would just say that if there was a surprise last night, I think most people thought Donald Trump was going to win 10 out of 11 states. That outside of Texas, he was going to win pretty much everywhere. Mm-hmm. And he did. Minnesota was a bit of a wild card because we only had like one poll from a month ago that Rubio had a slight lead on. So that one was a bit of a wild card going in. But I think everywhere else, Trump should have won outside of Texas, was thought to have won. Mm-hmm. And if you looked at the projections on the New York Times statistics website,
the 538, is that it?
No, not the one, because they kept basically what Nate Silver at 538 was doing after he broke off. They have sort of a different roundup.
Yeah, that's right. They are separate now, but he became famous.
And they were saying that he could get more than 300 if it's between. Then they estimated between 250 and 300. So 250 being the low end, he ended up with 238. So he actually was below the low end of their expectations. Cruz was above the high end of his expectations. Rubio was maybe 20 off from what they thought.
I think there's some news breaking as I think all of us are driving here to the studio this afternoon, which is that Ben Carson, he didn't exactly use the word suspend on his campaign website, but he did say he's skipping the next debate and he doesn't see a political path forward. So that pretty much sounds like he's out of there. And he was getting, what, 5 or 6 or 7%, something like that. So, yeah. Well, I mean, considering how close Cruz and Rubio have been very often, that could potentially make a difference there.
It's hard to avoid the conclusion that Kasich helped deliver Virginia to Trump, who beat Rubio by a few percentage points, and that Carson helped deliver Arkansas to Trump, who beat Cruz by a couple of percentage points.
And if there's ever any doubt that Rubio is the establishment candidate, if you saw the suburban Virginia counties up near D.C., where all the lobbyists, all the the bureaucrats live, solidly for Rubio there, I think. So, guys, hold on to that message. We've got to take a moment off for a commercial break. This is Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Well, welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, Joseph Ashby and Andy Hooser of KQAM Radio. So, a big story, of course, is Donald Trump having won a lot of stuff last night. Not everything, as we talked about, but a lot. And Larry Sabato at this University of Virginia Center for Politics, he took Massachusetts and Alabama, 2 states that are about as far apart as you can imagine, and looked at what Trump did in each of those states. And he won up and down and all across all sorts of demographic groups in those 2 states. Andy, does that really show that Trump is strong going forward, do you think?
To a point. Alabama has focused, and it's showing the exit polls that what they really liked, where they really liked his talk on immigration, and they really liked his talk on banning non-Muslim or non-U.S. Muslims coming into the country. That really resonated with them, which is why he did so well there. On the East Coast there, and with some of the liberals and on the opposite side of the spectrum, he appeals to a lot of moderates. If you look at the exit polls, Ted Cruz does very well with the very conservative group, whereas the somewhat conservative moderates go towards Trump. So between those 2 demographics, he's kind of got the good realm between the so-so Republicans and the ones that are just angry and fed up and stressed out, and he's being able to bring them together, which is why he's done well in both states.
There's also kind of this narrative that's going around that it was the establishment, and I don't really know what establishment means, but they're responsible for the creation of Trump as the front runner because they didn't listen to the regular people, the conservative grassroots leaders and non-leaders like myself throughout the country. Is there any sense to that, Joseph, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. There's if not for David Bratt beating Eric Cantor in an historic upset where the majority leader loses in his own party primary.
So that was in 2014.
Yeah, I think most people thought
majority leader, one of the most important people on Capitol Hill,
second in line to the speaker, or first in line after the speaker. If not for that, then they would have gone through and done an immigration amnesty, even though it was exceedingly unpopular among the grassroots of the party. And there was just always this feeling, yeah, you think things, I get that, but we're just going to do what we think is best, politically speaking, rather than policy-wise.
Mm-hmm. Well, so that, and he certainly suffered at the ballot box for that. Now, we all know that the establishment, again, who are these establishment people? Hardly anyone will admit to being in the establishment, but they are really concerned about a Trump nomination as being the nominee. So there's an anti-Trump super PAC that's formed, and Tim Miller just signed on. Now, he's a former Jeb Bush campaign spokesperson. So I'm thinking, wait a minute, Jeb Bush had how many times more millions of dollars did he have than anybody else? And he never gained any sort of traction at all, and of course had to bow out of the campaign a couple years ago. So are we relying too much on these retreads that? And now, some people have said, I learned a lot from the campaigns I lost as a manager, but I don't know. What do you think about that, Andy?
Well, I see it in a little bit different form with Trump. Trump may be anti-establishment or mainstream Republican, but I think when it comes down to, look, Rubio doesn't have traction. They're looking at getting rid of him. They're looking at dropping him. They're trying to find what the next establishment candidate is going to be. They despise Ted Cruz. They hate Ted Cruz. He's been in D.C. and he hasn't followed a single thing that they wanted him to do. I think that the establishment would prefer Donald Trump over Ted Cruz in there. So if they can't have their establishment guy like Marco Rubio or the mainstream Republican of John Kasich, of Chris Christie, of Ted Cruz, or of Marco Rubio, then they'll go to Donald Trump because he's the one that put him in there. He's funded them before. He's donated to them many times. He's friends with half of these guys. I would say that they would prefer Donald Trump, even though they hate him. They hate Ted Cruz way less.
Joseph, is it perhaps that Ted Cruz, I think, is seen as a man of principle, a constitutionalist, and doesn't very often, do this to see what the public opinion is, while Jimmy Carter has said, I think Donald Trump would be malleable. Is have something to do with that, do you think?
I think that most establishment types like Bob Dole, not running for re-election, he says, I'd rather have truth. Most establishment type would rather have Donald Trump in office. But the most important thing is not what you get done in office to most politicians. It's if you stay in office. Mm-hmm. And there was an ad from Maxine Kirkpatrick, a congresswoman in Arizona, running against John McCain. And it was a brutal, Trump-filled anti-McCain ad that she put out.
Now, is she a Republican or
no,
Democrat?
she is a Democrat. So okay. It's a montage of just the things that make you cringe that Donald Trump said, mixed in with 3 or 4 statements of John McCain saying, I would support Trump, party first, stuff like that, where it's such a turnoff to John McCain. And I think
someone did a commercial like that with Rubio and Obama or something, didn't they, too, a while back?
Cruz did that, where he interspersed their comments. And so on the campaign trail, which is more important to most politicians than what actually they do in office, it's winning. I think they're more comfortable with Cruz because he's a very disciplined campaigner. Mm-hmm. He does have various aspects of his personality and his platform that they can say, okay, I might not love his style. He's too pushy to me. The government shutdown wasn't the best idea to me in the world. But at the very least, here is a disciplined candidate who won't be embarrassing to us on the campaign trail. Mm-hmm. And so, although I agree with Andy, in office, they'd rather have the wheeler dealer that Donald Trump is. On the trail, they'd rather have the discipline that Ted Cruz brings. Now, about this super PAC, if you look at the data, Jeb Bush burned through $130 million and barely ran an ad against Donald Trump. So if the purpose of the super PAC is to blanket the airwaves with $10 or $20 million worth of this is why Trump is bad, then they have a shot at getting somewhere.
He spent a lot of money attacking Rubio and other kind of minor candidates. I'm here. One of the people who founded that campaign said only 10 to 20% of the negative material about Trump has seen the light of day. Now, that was at the end of January. And I guess I get it that, Republican on Republican violence is different than Republican violence on Democrats like Hillary Clinton or whoever it's going to be. But still, I mean, if Jeb really didn't want Donald Trump to go on, why didn't he pour a lot more money into, against Donald Trump? Because Trump makes his own advertisements, anti-advertisements, I should say. So it's not very hard to do that. We're going to take another commercial break. I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. With me this week, Andy Hooser and Joseph Ashby of KQAM Radio. So there's a lot of strategizing going on here now that some conservatives, like at National Review, of course, National Review magazine came out against Donald Trump in a big way about a month ago, saying, might really be better to have Hillary Clinton as president rather than Donald Trump. The logic being, with Hillary, it would be kind of like Obama. As long as there's a Republican Congress, we have gridlock, and that means that nothing gets done, and sometimes, that's better than getting some things done. On the other hand, people would go along with Trump, perhaps Republicans, and also President Trump as a Republican has a lot of patronage to give out. I mean, all sorts of jobs and et cetera, et cetera. Does that make any sense at all, Joseph? Or
it does. I don't know. If you want to see Republicans at their bravest, it's usually when they're fighting other Republicans, right? Mm-hmm. It's demonizing Ted Cruz for the government shutdown, or it's running against primary opponents or something like that.
Well, and everything Donald Trump says, is pretty much almost always,
Yeah, they push back against that, and so I don't think it's a clear-cut case that opposition to Hillary Clinton or opposition to a bad president, let's say, or a big government president. Let me put this that way. I don't think it's crystal clear which big government-minded person would be the best for Republicans to try to curtail in the Congress. So I think you have to see. Right now, I keep saying to people, this is the most conservative, the most constitutionalist, the most appealing Trump is ever going to be to Republicans. Mm-hmm. What does that general election look like? It's possible that Hillary could run to his right on several issues.
Yeah, and sometimes I think these people are just thinking way too hard about it. But you did see last night, Andy, instead of having a big rah-rah rally in front of thousands of people, Donald Trump had a really press conference that looked, well, except for maybe Chris Christie behind him, which people are poking fun at, it looked really almost presidential. I wonder, is Chris Christie, is he going to be, Secretary of State or maybe the buffets?
Attorney General, I think, is the one that people think.
I said Secretary of State, I said, Joseph, where the buffets are. But no, do you think that was a good move on Trump to kind of, burnish his image a bit? Having a press conference almost like a president would.
It definitely was a smart move for him. I mean, he's playing to the media. The media has hyped it up that the race is over, that he's got the nomination, that we need to look forward to the general election, that he's already got it wrapped up, which is pretty naive because we just finished Super Tuesday. He's got 300 delegates and we need 1,200 to win. Mm-hmm. We got a long ways to go. I think Saturday is going to be a really strong favor to Cruz in the end and really tighten up the race. But he did well with playing off what is being portrayed as he's got it. He's looking forward. He's looking forward to competing against Clinton, and that's it. I think Cruz did very well as well, saying that we need to unite with everybody else. They need to really consider dropping out and uniting behind him because he's got the best chance of beating him.
But still, Trump just can't help himself. He said something like, I'm going to get along great with Congress. I don't really know Paul Ryan, but we're going to get along great. Or he's going to pay a big price. Is that the way to make deals with people?
Well, I think it's funny that he says that right after he says that Ted Cruz can't work with anybody else and we need to reach across the aisle and negotiate with one another, and then say that he's going to stand firm and not negotiate with certain people is pretty funny.
Yeah, not very often you see a president in the same party as the Speaker of the House threatening the Speaker of the House during his victory speech. So
yeah, and it's just all these things he says. We're going to win. I had a trade specialist on this show last week from the Heritage Foundation. He says, you don't win in trade. I mean, both parties win because it's a voluntary type of action. Yeah. So all this type of stuff like how are we going to stop these jobs from going overseas? Can we stop it? A lot of things like that Trump never really says much, except he's going to put these huge tariffs on China or Mexico or whatever. And that type of stuff usually doesn't end up very well. at all. So we're about to run out of time here, I think, but any just prognostications into the future, Joseph, as we move along towards July in Cleveland, I think, but really it's really in another month or two most of the primaries will be over.
Prognostications, I've not been very good at that this cycle.
No one has this year.
I think that Donald Trump is a prohibitive favorite still. I think the only...
In other words, it's going to take something really huge. To derail the Trump train, I think.
I think it's possible if Marco Rubio says, you know what, I'll take the vice president slot and I will beg people to vote for Ted Cruz. I think that Ted Cruz can make up the delegates. I don't know that he gets the 1,200 or whatever, but he could be the leader going into the convention and therefore the nominee eventually. I think that's the only pathway to defeat Donald Trump. I don't think Rubio has one. Even if Ted Cruz dropped out right now and begged people to vote for Rubio, I don't think it would have the same effect, simply because Rubio's weaknesses among the Republican primary are much greater than Ted Cruz's.
And Andy, over on the Democratic side, I think earlier in the show, we agreed that Hillary Clinton has a pretty smooth path, except for, today I heard that Joseph DeGeneva is positive that there's a grand jury sitting right now hearing evidence about Hillary Clinton's emails. What happens if Hillary does get indicted between now and I don't know when it would be?
Well, and that's still a big possibility. I mean, she's got the pathway, she's got the momentum. Sanders has some momentum, and I think he's got more traction than what he thought he even would. But if she is indicted, that is a problem for the Democrats. And I think if they do that, then they unveil the curtain, and Joe Biden's going to be standing behind here to jump in last minute.
How can Joe Biden be the help? The savior of your party? The guy's a cartoon.
He is a cartoon. They'll let him out of his padded room, and they'll let him run. And I think that'll
Andy,
upset.
he is our vice president.
I'm sorry.
Our insane vice president, exactly.
But I think Bernie Sanders would be upset enough that now that he's gained enough traction, that I think he might even go to the Green Party, because they're going to be itching to have him run third party now that he's got some momentum, which will pull 8, 9, 10% of the vote for the Democrats, and then we'll have a surefire win come November.
And there's still thought that Mayor Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, might get in, and it's going to be, I think, really crazy. So we'll just have to wait week by week and see what happens. So. We're definitely out of time, guys. So, Joseph, Ashby, thank you. Andy Hooser, thank you for being on Wichita Liberty TV. And that's it for this week. I'm Bob Weeks.